In John chapter 11, as we've already seen, the Lord Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and he did that in the presence of a bunch of witnesses from Jerusalem. And those witnesses went back to Jerusalem and said, you got to hear what he did there in Bethany, 2 miles away or something like that. And so they told the chief priests, and in John chapter 11, verse 47, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council, that's the Sanhedrin, and they said, what are we to do? For this man does many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. They're cornered. They're trapped by the popularity of Jesus, the notoriety of Jesus, and the power of Jesus, in this case, to raise the dead. And they say something very specific here about what's going to happen if everyone believes in him. If we let him go on like this, verse 48, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. This council is in charge of kind of civic affairs. It governs Israel in the name and on the authority of Rome. And so the face of Rome is a Jewish face in Israel. And that was Roman policy. That's how they ran things to take some of the bite out of being an occupied territory of the Roman Empire. And so these are the men who rule Israel for Caesar. They're in charge of public safety. They're in charge of maintaining law and order and all that stuff. And they do it. But what they're worried about is that if they fail to put Jesus back in the box, then they are not able to keep order. They will lose popular legitimacy. And the Romans will step back in and take their power away and actually take away the whole nation. That's what they're afraid of. And it's this ironic moment here where Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, verse 49, said, you know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people than not that the whole nation should perish. He did not say this of his own accord, John adds. But being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not only for the nation, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. So, from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. You see the irony here? The high priest of Israel, Caiaphas, actually prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation and for the world, just as John the Baptist said, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. But he drew the wrong conclusion from his own prophecy. Imagine that. The conclusion he drew was, because Jesus is going to die for the nation, our power and status and our place here will be saved, and the whole nation will go forward. So, let's kill him. What kind of reasoning is that? Where does that reasoning come from? Who thinks like that? Well, John is saying we all think like that. And there is darkness in this world. That darkness and the light of Christ is what we're going to talk about in the spring. Starting in late January, we're going to talk about Jesus, the light of the world, shining in this darkness. But this morning, we're going to close the theme that we've been studying this fall, that Jesus is the Word who was with God and who was God from the very beginning, the one who created all things, and the one who became flesh to save us from our sins. That's the theme we've been studying throughout the Gospel of John, and we're going to close that theme in chapter 18 with the passage that Daniel read for us. Would you turn there, and let's look at the clash of two systems, the system of sin and the system of Jesus and his righteousness. There are two governments in the world right now. There is the government of sin, the system that is constantly reinforcing itself. And there is the government of Jesus, the kingdom of Jesus. And Jesus' kingdom is in confrontation with the system that it is overthrowing right before our eyes. And that system, the system of sin, is breaking down right in front of us, and Jesus is doing it, and he is using us to do it. So let's look at this clash between the Word from the beginning and the representative of Caesar. This clash begins in John 18:28 to 32, and it begins a dialogue that actually lasts all the way into chapter 19. Jesus' trial has a number of phases. This is actually in the middle of it. He's had phases of this trial before the council, the Sanhedrin, and the council wants to kill Jesus. They want to execute him, but they're stuck. They're trapped. Jesus is popular. He did just raise a man from the dead 2 miles away in Bethany. How are you going to kill a man who just resurrected the dead? How are you going to kill a man who has given sight to the blind, who has cured lepers, who has forgiven people's sins, who has taught things that turn people's worlds upside down? How are you going to kill that guy and not suffer the consequences? By killing Jesus, the Sanhedrin is afraid that they will set off the kind of popular unrest and violence that they're supposed to keep a lid on for Rome. They have a political problem here. And so a lot of this conversation is in code, and we have to do a little translating to understand what these Jewish leaders are saying and what Pilate, Caesar's representative, is saying in response. So the Jewish leaders only care about one thing: their power and their place. They want to preserve that. That's all they've got. Pilate, for his part, only cares about one thing too. He only cares about Caesar's power, Caesar's place in Israel. That's his only concern. He doesn't care about Jewish religion. He doesn't care about Jewish sacrifices, the temple. He doesn't care about the law of Moses. He does not care about any of that. He only cares that Caesar is acknowledged as the ruler of the whole world, and in fact, as the Son of God. That's all he cares about. Anybody who leaves that system alone, Pilate's fine. Anybody who challenges that system credibly and forcefully, Pilate is not fine. Pilate is going to respond. So that's kind of the context for this conversation. Verse 28, they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. So they're leaving the Sanhedrin, Jesus under arrest, and they're bringing him to the praetorium of Pilate, the procurator of the Roman Empire. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. It's a big day. They want to eat the Passover. They want to participate in that. If they so much as set foot inside the praetorium, they're going into a Gentile's house, which defiles them. They would be unclean and unable to eat the Passover. So they're on the porch so that they can eat the Passover. And Pilate, the Roman governor, comes out. Pilate went outside to meet them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you." Does that answer the question that Pilate asked? Not really at all. Pilate asked, "What's the accusation? What's the crime? What did he do wrong?" And their reply is, "Well, he did evil. That's why we're here. We wouldn't have delivered him over to you if he weren't an evildoer." In other words, we can't tell you what the accusation is, but it's really bad. And it's so bad that this man needs to die. And you know what that means. We can't say to you, a Roman, "This guy's an insurrectionist against Caesar," even though that's what we think, even though that's the most advantageous way for us to accuse him. We can't tell you that, because if we tell you that, then our populace gets all stirred up and angry, because now we're Roman collaborators, propping up Caesar's power. And we keep telling him that's not what we're doing. So we can't play that game. So we're just going to tell you he's an evildoer, and we're going to hope that you find the right pretext to execute him for us. Because if you do it, then we don't have a popular uprising on our hands, and neither do you. So that's why they don't answer the question. Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves. Judge him by your own law. It's not my problem. I know about the situation. I've been following the teaching of this man. I've been following what he does. This is a Jewish problem. This is a religious local issue. This is exactly the sort of thing that Rome does not get involved with as a matter of policy. Handle it. I don't care what you do." So they say to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." That's an interesting statement. It might have been true, but it didn't stop them from seeking to kill him in John chapter 5. And it didn't stop them from picking up stones to try to stone him and execute him in John chapter 8. And it didn't stop them from picking up more stones to try to stone him in John chapter 10. They don't care about the law. They don't care about any prohibitions against them killing Jesus. They are saying to Pilate, "No, you got to do it. Because if we do it, we are setting off a popular uprising. You don't want that. That causes problems for Caesar. Take care of this." Okay, so that's the setting in which all of this occurs. There's a game being played between the Jewish leaders and Pilate. Verse 32 is important. This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken, to show by what kind of death he was going to die. He was going to be lifted up before the people. He was going to be crucified, and that's a Roman practice, not a Jewish one. So this is the moment where the course toward Jesus' execution has been set. So that sets the terms for this trial. I want to make an aside here before we move on. There is a rising tide today of anti-Semitism, some of it among Christians. And anti-Semitism, of course, is rooted in, sadly, many Christian accusations that the Jews killed Jesus. And some of this gets read back into the Gospel of John as if that's what John is teaching. You need to be aware of some of the things that John is actually doing in this Gospel. He is showing, in fact, that the Jewish nation is divided. It is not unified. The division of the nation is the whole problem that the Jewish leaders face. They face the situation like in John chapter 7, where you got a faction over here saying this about Jesus, and they're saying that about Jesus over there, and some people think he's Elijah, some people think he's the Messiah, and some people think that he should just be killed because he has a demon. This is not a presentation of the Jewish people as unified against Jesus. This is a presentation of a small faction within the Jewish nation that drove this to a conclusion with help from Rome. And what we're going to see in this trial is that the death of Jesus was the responsibility of both Jews and Romans, representing in this story all Gentiles, all of us. It's a fulfillment of Psalm 2. Why do the nations, all the nations, not just Israel, all the nations rage and conspire against the Messiah? Why is this happening? He's going to be king. He is going to be raised up. And that's the prophecy of Psalm 2. It's being developed and fulfilled in John and his gospel. So John is not telling an anti-Semitic story. Liars twist this gospel into an anti-Semitic message. And you need to be aware of that because it's coming. It's already here, and it's going to gain ground, unfortunately. So let's look in depth at this clash, the issue that Jesus and Pilate now tangle over. Verse 33. Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" The first part of this conversation is a wrangling over how to define what is happening here. So Pilate makes an issue of who is king. Remember, that's the only thing that Pilate cares about. Caesar is king. That's his only priority here, is to make sure that Caesar is the unchallenged king in Israel. If Jesus is saying he's the king and not Caesar, then we got a problem. You're an insurrectionist. And so he is trying to define this trial in those terms. Jesus is not going to let the trial be defined in those terms. This is a clash of two systems, two governments, the system of sin in its darkness and the government of Jesus. So Jesus answers Pilate's question with another question. Witnesses, I think, probably not supposed to do that. Verse 34, Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord? Or did others say this to you about me?" Where is this coming from? Did the Jewish leaders from the Sanhedrin say that I'm a king? Of course, no, they did not. Not to Pilate. They can't say that because then they're giving up their own leader and causing problems with their citizenry and their popularity. So Jesus says, where is this coming from? Is this your observation or somebody else's, that I'm a king? Jesus is not going to allow this trial or this conversation with Pilate to be on the Jews' terms or on Pilate's terms. He is going to have this conversation only on his own terms. You're going to see why in a moment. But broadly, the reason he is not going to let Pilate define this is because Jesus, really is the one in charge here. So Pilate gets pretty hot under the collar about Jesus asking this question. Verse 35, Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Now he changes the question. And this is a very important moment in the trial. He first asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus refused to answer that question. And so now Pilate broadens the question. "Okay, you tell me what you've done. Why are you here?" Now, Jesus can answer this question on his terms and put his stamp on this trial. And what he's going to do is force the issue of truth. And he is going to challenge Pilate's own conscience directly. Look at verse 36. Pilate just asked, "What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world." So Jesus is saying to Pilate, "Look, if I'm a rebel, where's the rebellion? If I'm an insurrectionist, where's all the fighters in the streets? They aren't there, are they? So there's no insurrection against Rome. There's no trouble in the streets against Caesar. That's not what I'm doing. I am not that kind of leader." It's a pretty powerful argument. If the only thing you've got going on in the streets is Bible teaching, healings, prayers, and worship, instead of killing and bloodletting and violence, you've got a pretty good argument that there's no rebellion here. There's no insurrection here. We don't mean Caesar any harm in this world. It's kind of interesting. When you watch Jesus speak for himself instead of trying to speak for Jesus, which is what we do a lot of the time, something starts to emerge, and that is that our concerns are narrow. Jesus' concerns are universal. Our concerns are very focused on the one or two things that most bother us. Jesus' concerns for the justice of the whole world, light against darkness. The Jewish leaders, they only care about one thing, their place. Pilate only cares about one thing, Caesar's place. That's it. And they're going to define their whole world around that one concern. Every definition of justice, every definition of what's good politics and good governance, all of it is defined around the one thing that they care about. And what strikes me is we're still doing that. You have one or two things that most bother you about the world and your place in it. If you were asked to define justice, if you were asked to define how to fix the world, you would give a statement from that point of view, from a very, very narrow perspective. And so would I. That's how we're wired. That's the way this goes. Because there's a system that is governing this world, a system that drives us into that defensive crouch of sin. And as long as we get to define what is right and wrong, we're happy. But if you turn it around and somebody accuses me of wrong or you of wrong, all of a sudden we're back fighting again. That is the situation in this trial. This is a confrontation between Jesus and this very narrow view, first of the Jewish leaders, now of Pilate. So Jesus says, yeah, I'm not a threat to you. I'm not that kind of king. I have a kingdom, but it's not the kind you think. Pilate said to him, so you are a king? Jesus answered, you say that I'm a king. That's your word. You mean certain things by it. You define kings in terms of the system that you are part of, the system that is ruling this world, the system where the most powerful person defines what is good. That system. And the power, the ability to force your will, that power is the only thing that defines what is good for you, for Caesar, for the Jewish leaders. It's this grasping after power, because that's the ability to set the terms. Jesus says, you say I'm a king from that point of view, and I'm saying I am not coming from the same place that you're coming from. I am not that kind of king. And here's the challenge that he makes to Pilate's own conscience. You say that I'm a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world. Question, what's his point of view when he makes this statement? Is his point of view Bethlehem or Nazareth? And what life was like in Nazareth? How hard it was? How difficult it was to make a living there? How his father wore out and died early? Is that his point of view? The hardship that he suffered in Nazareth? What's his point of view here? The beginning. In the beginning, the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I came into this world for a purpose. It is not yours. It has nothing to do with what you're talking about. You say that I was a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Notice the definite article there. Truth is not an abstract category for Jesus. There is a body of knowledge, reality, that he says is the truth. It's contained here. It's in my hands. And I'm to bear witness to that. And so that's why I came into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Here is his challenge to Pilate. Everyone who is of the truth. What does he mean by this? Everybody whose formation, whose point of view, whose way of life is emerging from what I am telling you is the truth. Everyone who is like that listens to me. There's a very strong question implicit in that statement. Pilate, the procurator of Caesar, are you of the truth or not? Because so far he doesn't care. No Roman cares about this. And truth be told, no Jewish leader cares about it either. You've got a whole system that is conspiring to maintain and grab more power. Because power sets the terms for what is good. We don't care what the actual truth is. We just want the power to determine what we say is good. That's all. So Jesus says, I am of the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. I just want to go back with you to John chapter 3 and show you once again that Jesus is repeating himself with this challenge. He has made this challenge over and over and over again. Jesus, in conversation with a Jewish leader named Nicodemus, says in John chapter 3, verse 12, Nicodemus, let's back up to verse 11. We speak of what we know and bear witness to what we have seen, but you do not receive our testimony. I'm a witness to you. I'm telling you the truth. You don't believe me. If I have told you earthly things that you can verify, namely that Israel needs to be born again, the conversation they've just had, if I tell you earthly things that you ought to be able to see for yourself, and you don't believe that, how will you believe if I tell you heavenly things? No one has ascended into heaven except me. Nicodemus, you have to decide whether you're going to believe what I'm telling you about the truth or whether you're just going to pass it over. Look at John chapter 6. Jesus is faced with a crowd of people who want to make him king. They want him to seize power because they believe fervently that if he gets that power, he will do good from their point of view. And he doesn't want it. He's walked away from that, and he is now in a debate with them. He basically says to them that he is telling them the truth, and they are not believing him. Look at verse 61 of John chapter 6. With Jesus, knowing in himself that his disciples were grumbling about what he was teaching, said to him, "Do you take offense at this? Then what if you were to see the Son of Man, me, ascending to where he was before?" Where was that? In the beginning, the Word was with God. The Word was God. He made all things. And he was the life of human beings. He says, what if you see me ascending back there? It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is of no avail. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life, but some of you don't believe. Direct challenge to the conscience of his disciples in John chapter 6. Go to John chapter 10. In verse 24, a bunch of people in Jerusalem gather around Jesus and say to him, how long are you going to keep us in suspense? If you're the Christ, just tell us. Verse 25, Jesus answered them, I told you, and you did not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name bear witness about me, but you do not believe them because you're not part of my flock. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and none will snatch them out of my hand. You belong to the Father if you believe my voice. Same exact challenge. I'm telling you the truth, Jesus says. Why don't you believe it? And that is what he prayed in John 17, as we saw last week. This is the last one. He prayed for his apostles, the 12. Verse 16 of John 17, they are not of this world, just as I am not of this world. Sanctify them in the truth, Father. Your word is truth. As you have sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. They are now witnesses of the truth. So Pilate receives this challenge from Jesus. Everyone who is of the truth, chapter 18, verse 37, listens to my voice. How does Pilate respond? Verse 38, Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" You'll notice he loses the definite article there. He doesn't ask Jesus rhetorically, "What is the truth? Tell me about this body of things that is reality according to you." He doesn't ask that. He asks something different. He asks, "What is this thing, this category of stuff that you call truth? What is that? I don't think that exists. I don't think, if it does exist, that you can find it. I don't think it matters, because I'm the representative of Caesar, and I have power from him. I determine what is good. I determine what is true. I set the terms of this, and you don't." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And after he had said this, he went back outside. What is truth? And he walks out. But what's interesting, and what sets the course for the rest of this trial, is that he says none of this to the Jews. He says to the Jews, "I find no guilt in him." What is he saying? As of now, I'm not going to help you. You're on your own. This is your problem, not mine. I'm out. Now, of course, he can't stay out. But the rest of the story of his trial, Jesus' trial, is Pilate trying to wiggle out of making this decision, because Jesus struck his conscience and he was afraid. And by the end of it, he delivers Jesus over to be crucified, but quite against his own will. He doesn't want any part of it, because he knows none of this is true. There are two systems clashing in Jesus' trial. Our problem is that those two systems are still clashing. It's not Jesus against Caesar. Caesar's just a representative of one of those two systems. It's not Jesus against the Jewish leaders. They're just representatives of another expression of the same system. The system that governs this world, I would even say the government of this world, is sin. It's what drives everything. It's what we're trying to defend when we fight so hard. And in the terms of Jesus' trial and the clash that is ongoing, it is sin's power over us that Jesus has undone and broken. That is the rescue that he is performing in our lives. He is saving us from sin. And even in his trial, he is striving to save Pilate from sin, the man who has the power to kill him. I think some questions came in. I'm going to pause here and see if I can answer some of them. Why do people think that Jesus has a demon and that he does evil when all he does is good? Or do they just say that to get him killed? Don't they want someone to be able to heal the wounded and to do good to people? Why do they want him gone? I'm not pretending, and no one should pretend, that the attacks on Jesus had a rational basis. They did not. Sin does not have a rational basis. The idea that the Jewish leaders were in charge and had a place and had a nation was entirely fictional. They did not. Rome did. They served at the pleasure of Rome. They were fooling themselves. But look how far they would go to maintain that delusion. It's irrational. It is twisted, and it doesn't make sense. So I'm in complete sympathy with this question. Why would they want him gone if he was healing people and doing good? Well, that doesn't make sense. No, it doesn't. But if you shrink your world to the one or two things that you think are most important, and you define everything else in those terms, suddenly it makes sense. And that is the system of sin in our world. Very perceptive question there. Question, what is truth? Answer, the God of Israel is king of this universe, physical and spiritual. Jesus is his son, his messenger, and his appointed judge. There's an inescapable judgment for all persons, eternity in hell or salvation. And so that's the truth. So this more of a comment than a question, and it's a comment I agree with. What is truth? Jesus is truth. That's the ultimate answer in this passage. And that ultimately is what all people under the system of sin reject. Oh, there's got to be more to it than that. There's got to be more to it than that Jesus died for our sins and rose again. There's got to be more to it than forgiveness of sin and cleansing and the new birth. There's got to be more. And what do we want when we say there's more? We want the one or two things that we think define what is good. And we want Jesus to do that. When in reality, what Jesus is doing is crushing the entire system of sin right before our eyes. And in our lack of reason and ability to see, we think this world is powerful. The reality is this world is already dead, defeated, and broken. And Jesus has already won the victory. He actually tells us this in John in the upper room discourse. I have overcome the world. Don't be afraid. It's done. He said that even before he went to the cross. So I agree with this answer. But if we think about how Pilate's rhetorical question, what is truth? We think about that question and just how it plays out in the 20th century, in the 21st century. I think we see almost a prophecy of the refrain that human beings come to make against the claims of Christ. The refrain is not, we know the truth. The refrain is, what is truth? Doesn't matter. What scares me today is the nihilism of Christians. Our willingness to say anything to gain advantage in an argument, whether it's true or not. Our willingness to probe for any sort of weakness in the other person or the other side or the other point of view and just thrash it. Our willingness to do that is evidence that we are following the law of sin in this world, and we must turn from that. We cannot say that Jesus is truth if we are unconstrained by any definition of truth or even fact. And we do this continually because, as I've said repeatedly this fall, we're obsessed with politics, and that's one of the first things that goes in politics is any category of truth. There's only power. And so we are deeply infected with this, and I think that is the primary reason why evangelism in America has been so ineffective, is because on the one hand we say we believe the truth, on the other we find that we only want what is convenient and what we think will make us powerful. And this is an impossible place to be. Isn't sin, you say of Pilate, isn't that really the sin of choosing unbelief? I think that's a pretty good statement, and Jesus would certainly agree with that. He would say, Pilate, are you actually going to choose not to believe me and to believe Caesar instead? You already know how cynical that game is. Why would you make that choice? So I think that's a reasonable statement. Let's draw to a close with this. The Word became flesh to rescue us from sin. Right now, all over the world, the system of sin looks powerful. Like in this drawing, Pilate is kind of looming over Jesus. And Jesus under arrest, already having stood up under multiple interrogations all night, looking weak. As a question of fact, Pilate and the system of Caesar and the system of the Sanhedrin, it's all already broken. Jesus has broken them. So the message of the Gospel of John and the theme that Jesus is the Word is basically this: don't be deceived, don't be tricked into thinking that this world is as powerful as it imagines itself to be. The Creator of the universe became flesh and dwelt among us. And everyone who is of the truth listens to his voice. Are you one of them?